Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is, the full name of this, I quote, is the Katsu Handmade D2 Steel Blade G10 Handle Bamboo Style Japanese Razor Pocket Folding Knife with Pocket Clip. Oh, I kind of miss 040825992CF some days. But anyways, this is an interesting knife from an interesting company, Katsu. It's not a company I've really heard much of anything about. A viewer tipped me off to them and figured, it's inexpensive. Might as well check it out. I'm here to take baths so you all don't have to. And indeed, that's right what happened here. Let's do a size comparison on this little guy. First off, right here, we've got ourselves a Spyderco Delica. So you can see here that blade length-wise, this is not a really huge knife, although handle length-wise, it kind of is. Right here, we've got ourselves an Ontario rat number 2 and the rat number 1. Bam. Another inexpensive knife in D2 steel. So there you go. What else? Another knife that's kind of front flippery. Right here we have a Kaiser Feist. So you see about the same size there, although very different price tags. So there you go. Next thing to say, this is sort of a modernization of the Japanese traditional pocket knife called the Higo Nakami. I reviewed a traditional style Higo, although apparently I didn't get a good one according to the Higo fanboys or something. But either way, this is supposed to be a modern version of that with some modern conveniences. And then you'll note there's no disassembly video. That there's just only so many minutes in the day, and I don't really care. So, foreshadowing. Oh, that's, let's just go into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this little knife here. Okay, so on the good side, first off, I do like the bamboo pattern here on the scales. The G10 milling here is nice, and you can see as they dive in, it kind of reveals kind of an X pattern. It's neat. It's not something you see every day, and it's kind of unique to this knife, the bamboo style, that is. So that's good. Next thing, the blade on this guy is actually crowned. You can see they've taken the time to round this guy off. That's actually not very common in inexpensive knives. More usually you get a flat top blade like you see on this little Delica right here. So that's good, I guess. Next thing, the liner lock on this guy is absolutely solid. Very, very nice in that way. There's no real concern about this liner lock. Next thing, the price on this guy is actually not bad, I guess. It's like 45 bucks. And you're getting D2 steel here for your 45 bucks. And honestly, that is probably the most interesting part of this. And actually, let's just go there. The blade on this knife is by far the most interesting part of it because it is using a good steel, D2 steel, and the blade is relatively thin. I mean, the blade stock is exactly the same thickness as your Spyderco Delica, and it's relatively thin behind the edge as well. I mean, especially as you get further out here, it's sort of got a hollowish grind, if you will, and it's nice in that way. I appreciate very much the thinness of this. This is good for getting in there and cutting paper, things like that. So, that's good. And in fact, I think that's the good, is that the blade is relatively thin. It's thin behind the edge. D2 steel is a good choice. The price isn't so bad. At 45 bucks. The liner lock is solid. The blade is crowned, and I do like this bamboo style G10 handle. So there you go. That's the good. Let's find some great here. On the great side, yeah, you can tell I'm struggling here, right? I think the thing that I like most about this knife is the idea underneath it. I've mentioned on a number of occasions that I do love when makers attempt to sort of modernize traditional patterns. So whether they are, traditional knives with modern materials or really tactical spins on the traditional, that's a ripe area, I think, because when you do it right, you can get a nice mix of something that's culturally meaningful as well as practically functional. And so I love the idea that underlied this. I'm modernizing the Higo Nakami here. Don't think they quite landed it, but you know what? The idea behind it is great at least. So I guess that's what I'm going to say for the great. Let's jump into your bad here. Okay, so on the bad side, first off, something that's not bad so much as weird. This guy comes with a belt pouch, and that's not generally an issue, but the thing is, this belt pouch makes 0 sense relative to this knife. I mean, there's no outward sign as to why this knife needs a belt pouch. It's got a pocket clip, but also this belt pouch is not actually sized for this knife really at all. When you put it in there, it shakes, rattles, and rolls around with like no one's freaking business. So carrying this knife in this belt pouch is completely insane. So it just feels like the factory had a bunch of belt pouches and then decided, hey, you buy a knife, you get a belt pouch free. Works great with your Leatherman, though. So, yeah, that I don't get this. It's not that it's a bad thing, but the thing is, if I'm paying any extra money for this belt pouch, I'm not super pleased about that. Next thing, the action on this guy is not great. It's running on Teflon washes, which means it's smoothish, but it's also stick slippy, and it's not stellar. This is a better Teflon implementation than some, but still not impressing me too much. Next thing, unfortunately, the finishing work on this guy is not great, and you can see that if we look at the tip of the blade there. Oh, come on. Get in focus. You can see that on one side here, the grind is markedly different than the other one. This side is a lot flatter, and this side's a little more hollow. You can see that the crowning is much sharper over here than over here. I mean, this knife is just overall not super well finished. I mean, I get it for 45 bucks, but the thing is, even relative to other knives that are 45 bucks, they're doing a better job than that, so that's not super impressive to me. Next thing, unfortunately, in getting into more substantial issues here, they did screw up the sharpening choil pretty badly here. You can see that they attempted to put in a choil, and it looks okay, but the problem is you get this little beard guy down here, which is not great, and they've missed the plunge grind. The plunge grind comes out the here, and the sharpening choil ends here. Not a great look. I mean, it's something that a lot of people do, and every time it drives me nuts. Next thing, unfortunately, this knife is very thick. I mean, compared to the Rat 1, which is a very thick knife, which is also in D2 steel and around the same price point, but this guy comes in thicker. And remember that it's not just the uniform thickness. It's got the very thick part and the slightly thick part. Very thick, slightly thick. It's not great, and it doesn't carry all that well as a result. And then, speaking of the size of this guy, unfortunately, most of this handle is empty. I mean, if you look at the actual blade, the blade is taken up like this much of this knife. All of this is lanyard hole, and, it's not like the ergonomics are really good enough to justify it either. I would have liked to see this blade either sit a little bit more down into the scales, or at the very, very least, to remove a little bit of the blade. And I think they could have done a better job there. But as a result, the knife handle here is bigger than it needs to be, and that's not a beautiful thing. So to me, that's what's bad here, is that the handle is largely empty. The knife is very thick. They screwed up the sharpening choil altogether. The finishing work ain't great. It's on Teflon, which makes for an action, and it comes with a belt pouch that doesn't even make any sense with this knife and doesn't fit it very well anyways. Let's talk about what's ugly. So, look, the ugly here is, well, there are a couple of issues. First off, the Higo Nakami that this was based off of was a friction folder. A friction folder is a knife that is completely non-locking, but uses a tab of some sort that your fingers will press against in gripping the knife to prevent the blade from shutting, like on this little Viper Dan here. Friction folders are not something I love in general because I do prefer a locking knife. I'm luckily in an area where, legally speaking, locking knives are not a problem. And I get that some people do require them, but the thing is, they fixed the friction folder aspect of it. And I appreciate that very much. They've given us a lock here. But the problem is, they fixed the friction folder issue, but they left behind the biggest inconvenience of a friction folder, which is this big tang hanging off the back of it. And so you've got this big old ugly spur hanging off the back of this knife that is no longer even necessary. It doesn't do a damn thing for you here. They could have, if you wanted to open the knife, they could have just used a little tiny stub hanging off of it, like this little guy here, and turned the knife into a front flipper, which might have made it much more compelling. Or that they could have even made it a little bit smaller and a little more round, but instead they've got this big, thick, ugly freaking tab hanging off the bottom of this knife where it's no longer necessary. This is like going into the doctor's completely covered in measles rashes, getting treated for it and saying, wait, can I keep the rash? No, you don't want that. This is why we don't... So that drives me freaking crazy. But it drives me crazy even outside of the pocket, because once you lock this knife in, the tab doesn't sit flush with the handle. A smartly designed friction folder, when you put that in there, the tab just drops right underneath the handle. So ergonomically speaking, everything works well. This, unfortunately, was not intelligently designed, because the tab is sticking up above the freaking handle, which means that your thumb is sitting on top of this thing. And that's really deeply uncomfortable. If you try and bear down on this part is digging into your it's just freaking ugly as heck. And so it makes the knife even less ergonomic than it already is. And that brings me to the next ugly issue, which is that the ergonomics on this knife are kind of a mess anyways. It's kind of like grabbing a gym sock full of Legos arrows and broken pottery. I mean, you can grip it. It's okay in the hand, but the thing is, there are so many hot spots, ranging from the stupid tab on here to the clip, which is sticking up above this with sharp corners on either side, and then another sharp edge over here, and then the liner lock is surprisingly proud of the rest of the knife, and so you got a hot spot there. I mean, there are no areas of this knife that are not really a hot spot. Actually, that's not true. This little region right here is surprisingly ergonomically good. But basically, this is an ergonomic mess, and so that's terrible. And then finally, the thing that made me buy this, the thing that made me interested, is I thought it might be a decent front flipper. Like I said, a front flipper is a knife that's designed to be opened with a flipping motion like this. And so the blade pops around in there. But the thing is, to do that, you need to have a detent. And this blade basically does not have a detent. I mean, it is slightly harder to get it started than to keep it going. But practically speaking, there is no real detent here. And this means that you can't really front flip it, and partly because this tab is so long that it ends up hitting on your hand here. So they've completely missed even the opportunity to make this a great front flip. Basically, I feel like this knife was designed by somebody who had never made a knife before, or at least wasn't thinking twice about any of these issues. And so you end up with just this patch of ugly, where it's not even functional as a front flipper. The ergonomics are a mess because of this damn spur, and because the ergonomics are a mess, and that they've completely forgotten why you have this little thing and why you don't need it anymore after you fix the issue of friction folding and add a lock. So that to me is just, it's a singularity of ugly. Like, so many bad decisions were made here, and it just makes this knife a total pain in the neck. So let's go to your final conclusions here. Look, this is at some level not a terrible knife, and that's really the highest praise I can muster. I mean, it's not dangerous. It's not like, oh my god, this is going to cut your hand off. It'll cut things. It does work roughly as advertised. And I mean, the steel is even good, and it cuts things well. But the thing is, the copious amount of bad and ugly far outweighs the good on this knife. It's thick, the ergos are a hot mess, it's not all that well done, and it just doesn't make any sense the way this knife was designed. If you're going to make it a friction fold, if you're going to make it a locking knife, chop off the freaking friction folder tab, or if you're going to leave it on there, at least give it enough detent so it's a front flipper or something like that. It just, this knife, and then throw in the case, this is a knife that just doesn't seem to have much in the way of thinking behind it. And so it just, this is just not a good knife. I want to be fair to an emerging company. I want to be, supportive. I tried really hard to think of one situation, one person, one eventuality for which I might recommend the Katsu here. Thing is, just every time I fail, I don't get it. So that's my final conclusion, is I don't get it, and this isn't, the bad way outweighs the good on this guy. For 45 bucks, well, 45 bucks buys you a whole bunch of really nice pocket knives, and I hate to say it, but this ain't one of them. So there you go. Sorry, Katsu, but really, and I hope that you guys at least enjoyed this, that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.